Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Aftershock podcast. We're actually going to have new music. We're returning back to the old Aftershock vibe soon. My name's Colin Etnire, part of that Quakes Epicenter family for a long time now. I'm joined by Alex Morgan and Jamon Moore, as always. They are actually at I just about said the old name. They are at PayPal Park. They were covering the game. I'm still at home, of course, for the Cali Clasico. Final score ended up 3-1 to the Galaxy. That, if I am doing my math correctly, that's 6 losses in 7, with the remainder being a draw, and just 2 goals in that 7-game period. So it's definitely not the best time to be a Quakes fan, but I was curious if you had any particular... I guess maybe we should say, I'm taking your temperature. Where are you as in the mind of a Quakes fan right now? I'll start with you, Alex Morgan.
I'm not very optimistic, Colin. This was another match in which the Quakes, it just felt like they ran out of ideas. They weren't able to build through the Galaxy's mid-block. And, you know, in that first half, early part of the second half, I can't remember a single quality chance that they created. You know, Cowell gets that goal late on. That's a bright spot, something to send the fans home happy about, I think. But other than that, there just wasn't much going forward. And that was obviously after the Galaxy had put 2 away, right? So the Quakes, building out of the back, there was just nothing to get excited about. And then in terms of their defense, you know, Galaxy have Chicharito. You leave him unmarked twice, he's gonna kill you, and that's exactly what happened.
Jamon.
Yeah, the Quakes got hammered by a counterattack team now, you know, for the second time in 2 games. Didn't really learn their lessons from the previous game, and an embarrassing own goal to boot. You finally got, you know, your first open play goal, and I think I tweeted out it's been 6 games and 83 minutes since the last open play goal. The Showpiece one was off of a corner, and it did feel for 83 minutes like they just didn't really have ideas. They didn't. There's nothing, you know, that was really felt all that dangerous other than a post. And, you know, beyond that, what we're seeing right now is an Almeyda team that prides itself in having control of a game and dictating to the opponent. And they have possession, and their passing numbers are not horrible. You know, all the pieces are there, you know, in the other 2/3 of the field. But when it comes down to the final third, something is really badly missing at this point.
One of the interesting things that I've noticed in the last couple of games, and I wanted to hear your perspective on, is, you know, when we talk about analytics, a lot of the ideas focus on game states and the way that teams are playing in particular game states. Almeyda's teams, when they're at even, don't look pretty good. When you are down 3-0, then all of a sudden, you know, it wasn't just the 83rd minute goal, but I think there was actually a couple of minutes prior to that, they started to build something. And there's a couple of times in this 7-game skid where the last 15 minutes or so, it looks like there's some attacking impetus, but they're already down behind, they're behind the 8 ball at that point already. So I was just kind of curious of, like, what exactly is changing between them? And is there a way to take that attacking impetus that we see when they're down late and kind of move it earlier into the match? Can we capture some of that? Alex, I guess I'll roll it to you first.
Sure. I mean, I think the key that got San Jose's attack working in the second half was sort of a little tactical switch that Almeyda did. They had been playing without like any width at all. They had started Chofis on the wing, Jackson Yule at the 10, and who was it out wide left? Espinosa,
and, the right footer.
They just didn't have any width. That combination didn't work at all. I think Jackson Yule looked really poor at the number 10. I just don't think he has the, you know, the touch in those small spaces in front of the box. And then Chofis was playing inverted so far in the middle that, like, the Quakes just didn't have anything on the right wing, nothing at all. And, you know, usually you're going to ask Paul Marie to step forward down that right wing and as a fullback, and that's where you get some attacking width from. But he was scared. He was scared because Cabral and Chicharito were so dangerous and had scored early on him. So the Quakes just didn't have any width at all. And that was their big problem, I think. And so what changed was when he brought on Cowell. And then he was able to move Espinosa wide right, Chofis back into the middle, and that combination clicked. That combination was working. Chofis had a much better stretch there when he was at the number 10 position. He had 2 really good shots, really close. One hit the post, and those were both great moves. Espinosa looked more dangerous. Cowell added energy. And for those 5 or 10 minutes, I thought the Quakes actually legitimately looked dangerous for the first time in a couple matches. And then Almeyda changes it. Almeyda moved Cowell to the right, Espinosa to right back, and put Shea Salinas at left wing, and they totally lost all their momentum. So I think that was a really sort of point of mismanagement from Almeyda. I thought that was a really poor decision. Just when it felt like the Quakes had some energy, there was sort of anticipation building at PayPal Park, he changes it up, and the Quakes lose all of that. So is that something that the Quakes can bring from the opening whistle? I think so. I think if you start with a lot of width, then they're better set. Is that going to turn it around for them after 7 games with 2 goals? I don't think so. I think they probably need another addition up top, but certainly it would have been better than what we saw tonight.
So just one quick clarifying question. They said on the Univision Deportes broadcast that Cade Cowell was carrying a knee knock. Is that what you guys have heard as well? Is that the reason why he's not getting these 90 minutes, or is this just a tactical decision?
We've not been told by PR that there's any sort of injury to Cade Cowell. I'm not saying there's not, just that it's not been raised to us at all.
Fair enough. It's something I think that we're looking into, because that's obviously, I think, one of the things that all of us are asking is, Cade Cowell is the most dynamic attacker on the team. Why isn't he playing? If it's a knee issue, that, look, my Spanish is poor. I could have heard the broadcasting correctly, but it certainly sounded like that's what they were saying. Then that's one thing. If it's a tactical decision, then it's bewildering, because whatever it is isn't working. And Cade wasn't as effective in the last, I don't know, half dozen games as he was at the beginning of the season, but that he has it in him. And so it seems weird not to persist. So that's kind of an unusual decision. And I totally agree with Alex that there is something wrong about the shapes that he's chosen in terms of the width they produce just not being enough. Jamon, any other kind of thing that we can bring earlier in the game?
Well, I think you guys are onto something about the width. I just wanted to add to that, because one of the things that we've noticed over these last 3 games particularly is how kind of vertical everything has been, to the point of sometimes often stretching out the defense so much. Now, they didn't get stretched quite as much tonight. At least it wasn't as noticeable to me live as it was on television before. But the one thing that I will say is that the attack itself over all 3 of those games, regardless of the starting formation, just hasn't gotten the type of width that Almeyda tends to want to get in his attack. And it just kind of comes back to the combinations he's selecting. It's the starting lineups. It's trying to throw out Andy Rios and Chris Wondolowski together, and Showpiece should be able to play an inverted winger, because he did it at Chivas for Almeyda. Like 80% of the games that he played for Almeyda, he was an inverted winger on the right-hand side. That should be something that works. But, to Alex's point, he just kept drifting inside. Last year I put out an article that was, about basically playing the kids. I think you go back all in on the kids at this point. Why isn't Tanner Beeson starting? Frankly, he's been pretty much the most reliable defender that the team has had this season so far. You have people like Benji Kikanovic could use an opportunity. Said Haji has been electric when he's gotten the chance. He hasn't really gotten that many chances. Like, why aren't we seeing more of these guys? I mean, typically this is where the coach goes, hey, I'm going to throw out the young guys and see what happens. We're 7 games along here, Colin, and so far, not really seeing those young guys until like the game is already lost. And sometimes not even that.
I don't know, Jamon. I just don't think the Quakes have a ton of depth. If you look at their bench, I mean, Nathan, their new center back signing, he's in the 20-man roster, and he flew into San Jose like a week ago, right? Like, I'm actually surprised he was eligible in time to be put on the roster today. But I think it goes to show that they just don't have a ton of depth. The fact that he was able to make the roster that quickly, I just don't see guys like Kikanovic or Haji or some of those other young guys who you might bring in really stepping up the level. Sure, it might be something different, might be worth the experimentation, but I don't think that's going to be the thing that makes the Quakes significantly better. I said it before, I just think they need another DP player, DP quality player or high TAM level player in that offense. And to be honest, based on Matias Almeyda's comments, midweek after the Orlando game, I think he probably agrees. He was talking about how, the roster just isn't good enough is basically what he was saying. He was saying that there's differences between Orlando's roster with, Daryl DK, Nani, LA's roster with Chicharito, and San Jose's roster. And so I think that, I'm going to ask him definitely more about that after tonight's match, whether he thinks the Quakes need more additions up front to improve going forward. But that's what I think. And I'm seeing Colin shake his head here pretty vigorously. So I want to hear your thoughts, Colin.
Look, we're doing the polite post-game breakdown thing, and we're avoiding the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is Matias Almeyda competent to run this team? Is he ever going to be successful in San Jose? Which is a slightly different question than will he be successful somewhere else? He could well be. He will never be successful in San Jose. And one of the reasons is exactly what you're bringing up, Alex, which is he's saying, I need better players. I need better players. Guess what, Matias? You brought in a lot of these players, and a lot of these players are brought in explicitly at his choosing. They were people that he pushed for, and a guy like Matias Almeyda with the profile that he had at Chivas does not agree to come to San Jose unless he's given the title of manager and given more authority on who's on the roster, who comes in and who goes out. We know, Jamon can help us out here with some more specifics, but we know at least a few of the specifics of the players that he has chosen and the players that he's chosen against. He opted for Andy Rios on almost $1 million a year. He opted against Danny Masovsky on less than $100,000 a year. I'm sorry. Matias Almeyda is not a good judge of talent of the pool that he's looking for, and he's not bringing in the right guys. And when in my business, if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I know I'm not doing a good job with a short budget. If you double my budget, I'll do a better job. That's not who you back. You back the guy who's doing a good job with a half budget, and then you double his. You back the manager who's proven he can do more with less. And this is a salary capped league. So even if you have a lot of money, you're still going to have to get a lot of those talent evaluations right at the lower salary levels. LAFC, a lot of their best players, a lot of their really good finds are actually the lower salary players. And that's one of the reasons they have had success. If you look at the other teams around the league who are very successful right now, let me put it this way. We went for Andy Rios in San Jose. Philadelphia went for Kasper Shibilko, who's much cheaper and much more effective. You can't use the bad players to excuse Matias Almeyda's bad coaching because he chose the bad players. He may be successful in a different situation. I just can't imagine it being here. With that off my chest, though, I'll tell you, I will leave it open to you. I know there are absolutely fans who are completely still in his corner. Do either of you feel differently? Is there a version of reality where he ends up being a good coach in San Jose, where he succeeds here?
I tend to see both sides of the issue. Now, look, I also tweeted out the other day about Orlando City's salaries. They have one, quote unquote, highly paid DP. That's Nani, right, at $2.3 million. And they have a roster full of people who they've acquired basically through the draft and through trades within the league. And they've built a very competent team that is probably the most dangerous counterattacking team in this league. And the Galaxy have made shrewd offseason moves, not overpaying, to be able to do some of that. So I think we're going to be getting probably to the press conference here in just a minute. Looks like they're saying they're going to go on air. I've not heard any change in order. We believe we're going to get Matias Almeyda and Jackson Yule, but it looks like Jackson Yule is going to be up first.
Hey, Jackson, thanks for taking the time to speak with the group.
No worries.
All right, guys, we are now joined by midfielder Jackson Yule. We can go ahead and get started with a question from Alicia Rodriguez.
Thank you. Jackson, obviously a big game for you guys and didn't turn out the way you were expecting, I would assume. What went wrong in this game, and what has been what's really been kind of plaguing the team lately on this winless run that you guys are on?
Yeah, it was an important game for us when we were hoping to come out and get a good result. I think we still are playing our style of football, and we're still trying to do things. I think what's hurting us at the moment is our mistakes and our turnovers that lead to really good chances by the opposition, and they're putting away the chances that we kind of give them and the mistakes that we make. And then we're having a hard time recovering and scoring goals on the offensive end. So it's just about, you know, limiting those mistakes and working on ways to try to create more chances, because I think we do have good moments in the games, and I think we do have opportunities to be in the lead and stay ahead, but we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot early on in the game and having our time to recover.
Hey everyone, sorry about that. Matias is gonna do his conference really quick and we'll be right back.
Well, that is a confusing turn of events here. I'm going to continue streaming the webinar here. It looks like they're pulling Jackson Yule out of the press conference because Matias is ready, which is something that has never happened before. We are just as confused as you are here. And Jackson was barely getting started about talking about the loss and digesting the loss. And I'm curious if anything from his comments stood out to you, Colin. He was saying that it was down to, you know, mistakes and not executing. And, you know, I think that's probably the professional thing to say, taking responsibility as a player. But for me, it was the way they were set up. And the fact that he was in the number 10 position and looked very uncomfortable was the main reason why it wasn't working.
Yeah, look, saying individual mistakes makes it sound like it's a player issue. Now I'm forgetting exactly where this came from, but I read an article at some point, and Alex, if you read the same, you can tell me where it was, where their coaches are fans of man marking on set pieces because it allows them to blame players, because it says, hey, I assigned this player to this man, and therefore, you know, it's his fault. Jamon, you might have pointed me in the direction of this article in the first place. Whereas with zonal marking, which is, there is no argument from an analytical perspective, zonal marking is a better system. However, if it doesn't work, the coach gets blamed because it's a schematic thing rather than a one-on-one thing. I think that this is a classic example of Matias Almeyda in his man-marking system is something that actually allows him to shirk responsibility, because it allows him to say, hey, this individual player, you know, Osvaldo Almeydas on both the Chicharito goals, Chicha got on the right, you know, on the incorrect side of him and put the ball in, and so it's Almeydas' fault, right? Well, you know, maybe there's a scheme behind it, but it hides easier when it's a man-on-man scheme. So that's actually the thing I picked up from Jackson's comments is like, individual mistakes, individual players, it's on us. Jamon, I'm very curious if you had anything of that kind of, just given that we didn't hear much from Yule, if you had anything to say about it.
I'm just bewildered by what's going on here. I thought that Matias would be jumping straight in, and now he's not. And so, you know, we're left with asking one question, and we're also trying to figure out if we're going to get Jackson back after we talk to Matias. So I guess we'll just kind of go with the flow here. You know, I mean, there definitely were plenty of mistakes tonight. I mean, you know, that the own goal by itself just kind of was emblematic of just how things have fallen apart for this team. That ball just like goes in the goal for the Galaxy without any effort at all on their part. And here we have the Quakes on the other end struggling for many games to get a goal. And you know, it's at this point, it's not mistakes per se, it's execution, because if they do what they're supposed to do on their end of the field and they keep the pressure on and they keep the shots going and such, they're not even getting to the point of firing shots. So the problem is that when the ball is turned over, you're not turning it over in the box because you got off a shot and it went awry. You're turning it over in the middle of the pitch, and you're giving the opposition, who's a talented opposition, doing well in this league with fast players and a talented striker up top who can finish balls off, you're giving them an opportunity to counterattack you, and you're effectively not set up to be able to be successful in that particular situation. I think some of it does, again, go back to kind of the width issues and the way that the team has been getting stretched. So we're hearing now that Matias wanted to address the team and has asked for Jackson to return to the locker room. He will return when I guess that's done, or I don't know if we'll get Matias next. So quite an interesting development. But the other night he allowed Colin, I don't know if you caught this, because I know the things were a bit late your time, but he allowed Shea Salinas to come to the press conference while he was in the middle of addressing the team, because, well, no one can get mad at Shea Salinas in a 5-0 loss, right? Because he was the guy that was actually bringing the Thunder more so than any other player, and so he allowed him to come. Looks like he didn't want to do the same for Jackson tonight. So kind of an interesting turn of events there.
I want to pick up on the thread of individual mistakes, though, because it's not just, I don't think you can blame the players. I mean, look, we know Flo is going to make mistakes like that. We know he's going to be over aggressive. He's going to get beat 1v1, and he's going to have a couple bad touches at the box. We know that. Flo knows that. And it's Almeyda who's still putting him in at center back ahead of Tanner Beeson. It's Almeyda who's setting his players up for failure by having them play such a high-risk, strategy that way and putting them in those spots, right? If the Quakes are possessing the ball higher up the field, if they're putting themselves in good spots and have structure, they won't be put in situations where all their mistakes are super costly like that, right? It's about the setup, about the structure, and the way that they're trying to play. That's what makes them vulnerable or not, right? All the mistakes stem from some deeper tactical, issue, I think, Colin.
Yeah. Jackson Yule playing at the 10, Chofis Lopez playing as a right winger is actually not necessarily an unreasonable thing to do. But if you have Paul Marie as your right back, who's expected to provide all the width, and he's getting a lot of pressure on him, and you don't have natural width on that side, then it is a problem. These are all examples of not putting their players in the best place. And look, believe me, I see what's in the comments. I see everything that has been argued against in defense of Almeyda. This is a salary capped league. You need to be able to pick players who are not the highest paid in their position in the world. For 27 of the 30 players on every MLS roster, you have about the same amount of money to spend. And every single team spends the same amount of money on those 27 players. There's 3 players where you don't have that limit, and that does cause variation between teams. But we're not seeing good quality from those 27. The only other thing I would say on this, though, is there is an aspect of this is Matias Almeyda's fault. There's an aspect of this is Jesse Fiorinelli's fault. There's an aspect of this is John Fisher's fault in the sense of an underinvestment, by the way, not just in the playing staff, but in the front office staff, the scouting, the technical staff, data analysis people. They don't have a full-time one, training facilities, academy facilities, blah, blah, blah. All of these 3 things can be true. And just pointing to the other problems does not obviate the need to focus on what Matias Almeyda can do. Matias Almeyda had a successful record at Chivas, although not entirely successful. He had a very poor domestic league season while he was winning the CONCACAF Champions League. But that's a very different place. It has an unusual transfer policy and a very strong technical department inside the club itself. That's not true here in San Jose. They're not the top spending team in the league. They don't have a huge technical staff that's very strong and empowered against them. This is just a different context. And if he can't identify good talent at $500,000 and $1 million, it's not going to work in MLS because you need to hit on those.
Yeah, the thing that I was pointing out earlier in the preseason was, and this was back, I think, when there were questions around Almeyda and whether he would come back next year and would he get the money he needed in order to get the players that he wanted. And I posed the question of, if you were Fisher, would you give Matias Almeyda that money, given what Matias Almeyda has done with the money that you have already given him? And by the way, is probably the highest paid coach in the league, at least until this season. We don't really know the coaching salaries, but I asked a couple of people in MLS, and they're like, yeah, he probably is the highest, and maybe Atlanta's manager here is surpassed him this season, but we're looking at, 2 million plus here, right? Basically, it's DP money in your manager. And so he's a part of that. And it's important that I agree with you, Colin. I think you have to be able to look at all 3 of these things. And it does start at the ownership. You don't have 3 DPs. But honestly, a lot of teams right now don't have 3 DPs. Coming out of COVID, teams have not gone out and signed a bunch of DPs because of financial situations. The Quakes have chosen to retain all their staff. Nobody in this staff got let go during COVID, which is very different than most MLS clubs. And that's where they allowed their money to be and to sit, and they went through that expenditure. So the problem here is going to be that if you have an owner that's going to spend in these kind of ways, you have to be a bit more creative in the players that you're bringing in. Should you have 3 DPs? You should. Every team in MLS should. Why? So that you can compete with Liga MX come CONCACAF Champions League, because they're going to have 17 of them on the other side. You have to be able to use those DPs. But since MLS doesn't force that to happen, the next best thing, given his hands are tied, that Jesse Fioranelli can do is get someone in kind of that DP range and use things like TAM in order to bring them down like they just did with Nathan. So people will look and go like, well, he's not a DP. Well, he's paid DP money. He just happens to have had TAM used in order to be able to buy him down to a TAM level player. And the team actually did pay a transfer fee on that. I confirmed with Jesse Fioranelli today.
Yeah, Jamon, sorry, before you go, Alex, we should clarify though, just because I feel like this is the zone that I always need to clarify about that. Yes, TAM players are making in the DP range, but the TAM budget and the salary budget and the GAM budget collectively are the things that the teams are expected to use every year regardless. So if it's a TAM player, that's coming out of that set budget, and therefore there's no differentiation between this club and any other club in MLS in terms of its spending. The only places that you can hit your playing staff that are off budget are actually homegrown players up to a certain limit, and it's relatively modest, and the DPs. And so even though they're spending on TAM players and hitting that budget, to me, that's not making a difference. And that's why I'm saying, like, there is a serious problem with ownership's underinvestment, not just in the playing staff, but in the back office staff and in the infrastructure as well. But no matter how big of a problem that is, none of that takes away from the fact that Matias Almeyda is not the solution for the San Jose Earthquakes.
Well,
Alex,
Colin,
please.
You asked earlier, is there a situation in which Almeyda could succeed with the Quakes? And I think the only way at this point in which I envision that happening is if you put Jesse Fioranelli entirely in charge of all of their transfer business, because all of Matias's signings, the signings that essentially Matias spearheaded, Rios, Fierro, Chofis, the players that he brought in, they've by and large been flops, complete flops. Whereas the players that Fioranelli has probably spearheaded, you talk about Espinosa, Judson, maybe even Nathan, that would make more sense.
Remedi as well, by the way, was a Fioranelli-driven signing.
Eric Remedi as well. Those have been more effective players, I think, and you can justify their salaries a lot more. So the only situation, I think, in which I could see Almeyda succeed going forward is if you completely leave the responsibility of transfer business up to Jesse and then leave Matias to do the coaching. I think that's really the way forward for the Quakes.
Yeah, I agree with you, Alex. I think that the investment has to go up, period. There's really no discussion. But it's not the be-all and the end-all. The coaching, it's just not working, and it won't work. The front office decision-making, when it's just been Jesse's moves, you're right. I actually think it has established a halfway decent track record, particularly on the lower end of the roster. I think they've drafted well, for example, and they've pulled up a couple of decent ones out of USL. And a couple of the times when they would have pulled a decent one out of USL, like Masovsky, it was overruled by Almeyda. So I think that the GM is the one place where I'm not convinced it is necessarily a problem. It's not to say he has a perfect record. None of the GMs in the world do. If you look at the directors of football around the world, all of them have hits and misses. That's just the one area I don't think is unambiguously at fault for what's going on right now.
And Colin, I also think that's the way forward because, we're talking about, is Almeyda the right man to continue to lead the Quakes forward? Who else is there? They let go of Ian Russell, who is sort of the obvious man to take the coaching position after the Quakes. They let him go to Toronto. I don't think there is an obvious sort of next in line to take over the team. Maybe Chris Leach, he's the technical director, but he wasn't all that impressive in the little stint that he had after Michael Stare was fired, back in 2017. There is really no other good option for the Quakes. They sort of put all their eggs into the Almeyda basket, right?
This is one of my concerns right at the beginning of when this happened, is that when you buy into Almeyda's system, you completely change the tactical setup going down to your academy through the USL team, which now will be MLS2, and you change the focus of players that you're acquiring. You change the coaches who are available. You're importing a system that's and then implanting it in on your own and replacing whatever you had before. So you lose a lot of that. And if he's the right guy, that's what you should do. You should invest in the system as the right guy. I just think that that's one of the problems there. But I want to turn it back to Jamon here about, this is something we actually discussed very briefly before the video got started. Look, none of the three of us are particularly convinced by Matias Almeyda, but do we actually solve anything by relieving him his duties right now? Is there anything that gets solved by that?
Absolutely nothing is solved by doing it right now. And I think that's the big question. If you are John Fisher and if you are Jesse Fiorelli, absolutely nothing gets solved. You have no ready replacement. No one is going to step in tomorrow as the coach of the San Jose Earthquakes if Matias Almeyda is gone today, for the reasons that you guys were talking about. He brings his entire staff with him. So you would be talking about bringing in someone like from the academy side at this point. And I don't know of anyone in the academy who is that level of a coach like they have at FC Dallas and other places where they been able to bring that type of person along. I don't know of anyone who's engaged, with the team at that kind of level that they would have a good understanding of the players and be able to make solid personnel decisions. And then what do you do about the defense? You've kind of built this whole man marking system, and do you go to a different defense? And then what do you do about Almeyda's players that he's brought in? They're clearly going to lose whatever motivation that they have. And so now you've taken a big part of your roster and completely demotivated them because they were loyal to one guy. There's no easy solution here other than if you were going to do something, you should have done it before the start of the season. And now pretty much you're stuck and you're probably not going to be able to make it until the end of the season. But if I was the club, I would start to look into potential options at this point.
Jamon, here's the thing. I think you can start planning for a post-Almeyda era. And I think they might have already started doing that. Nathan, to me, reads like a signing that is meant to be here, beyond Almeyda's tenure in San Jose. He has a 3-year contract, which is longer than what's left on Almeyda's contract. Almeyda only has another 1.5 years on his contract. So he will be here beyond Almeyda. And, him being sort of more a European Swiss signing with connections to Jesse, that reads to me like maybe Jesse Fiorelli is planning beyond the Almeyda tenure. And if they can continue to do that, I think that's sort of the off-ramp that you get from Almeyda. But in terms of, do you sack him now? I think unless it gets really, really, really embarrassing, you kind of got to wait till the end of the season.
Yeah, but mid-season changes don't typically go well, and I think that particularly for a San Jose, you need somebody who's going to be a culture creator and a culture setter. Matias is that, actually, and he's created a culture and a belief in the team that did not exist before him. Certainly under Mikel Stare, who never got through in any dimension, but even under Dominic Kinnear, who the players really liked and had serious connections to the club, he didn't create a winning culture. He didn't create a culture that could translate. The culture that Matias has created actually in some ways is pretty good. His tactical naivete and his ability to scout and identify talent are really where the problem is. But if you rip that culture out, you need to kind of develop something else. And it's hard. That doesn't really happen just through the middle of the season. So it's just one of those things where, look, backing Almeyda at this point makes no sense. Because he hasn't proven that he can do well without resources he is allocated. And Matias Almeyda, from his perspective, maybe he has a right to go seek a situation that is more to his liking. Good for him. But, 1.5 years left on his contract, that's getting to the point where, you should be thinking about terminating it kind of mutually at this point.
I think, the fair thing, like you said, Colin, is that he has helped create a culture that did not exist before. There has been more connectivity of the club with the academy. They didn't immediately start off the academy and go okay, we're going to have them do this man marking system. They had them change the way that they played and did 1v1s in certain ways. And they have, made slow movements on the academy to kind of introduce new concepts and get them to play in a different style. In fact, a style that at the academy level has been pretty effective. Right now, I believe it's the 15s and 16s who are playing in the playoffs for MLS Next and are actually doing pretty well. I think they won their regional playoff game, and now they go on to the next game there. So there are signs, and by the way, the Boys Academy has never been an academy that has done really well on the national stage. The girls' academy, when it existed, won a national championship, but the boys' academy has never reached that kind of level. Developed good players, but never as a team reached that level. And so it does instill something, and I do believe in the ethos of Matias Almeyda is generally a good ethos. I think he brings the right thought process into it. But I think what we're talking about at this point, and I know the fans have different takes on what we're trying to say here. We're not against Matias Almeyda. What I think we see is that there's this kind of ceiling in terms of the way everything is set up right now, in terms of what he can accomplish with this particular club and these particular group of players. And we're bumping up against that ceiling. And even if you turn it around, you're still looking at somebody who is, it's not going to get beyond like that 7th and 8th and 9th playoff spot. So if someone actually just sent me a text and corrected me, the 19s with JT made it to the Final Four. So correcting myself.
I was there that year.
Thank you for pointing that out. But I'm just talking by and large, like boys academy, they're not a consistent playoff team that's always making, what was the USSDA playoffs, now the MLS Next playoffs. And so, there are some elements of that. But thank you for the correction to the person who sent that to me.
And Jamon, I just want to echo what Jamon was saying there is like, Matias Almeyda could very well go to, Rayados in Mexico, like he almost did in this offseason, and be very good wherever he ends up next. The mixture of qualities he has, though, are just not the right mixture for San Jose. He has the right culture setting qualities. The players, I believe, my impression is that they are still largely behind him. We're not getting kind of that sniping that we got about Mika Stare or, God forbid, Mark Watson back in the day. It was like very obvious when they had lost the locker room. He has that. The tactics is just not really there. But the real thing, the thing that's most important in MLS is talent identification, because it's a salary capped league. And therefore the most successful managers in MLS history have mostly been the most tactically flexible ones, because they have accommodated the fact that they had to kind of look through the bargain bin because of the salary cap. The bargain bin doesn't apply to those 3 designated players, and you got to get those right as well in terms of talent ID. But Bruce Arena, what is his tactical identity? It's just whatever worked. Ziggy Schmidt for his time. But even, Caleb Porter, one of the more recent successful coaches, is somebody who's switched between a very conservative system and a slightly more aggressive system. And so for me, it's you can't have a tactically rigid guy who doesn't know how to scout talent.
I think I would love to see for his next step, Almeyda coach a national team, because I think, when you're coaching a national team and taking them to tournaments, sort of that mentality and sort of the ethos and the drive that he brings is more important. And, we've seen him be a good tournament coach with the Quakes when they played in Orlando at the MLS's Back tournament last year. It's just the problem comes when you have a season of 34 games and, the Quakes go really hot and really cold. We've seen the same pattern now for the last 3 years, where they, sort of start hot and then just totally flame out. And for the past couple of years, they've been able to salvage it. Maybe they'll be able to salvage it again this season, but it's just a ceiling that they hit. I'm pretty confident. You can be pretty confident that they're never going to be any better than a bubble team under this current setup, right? That they're going to sort of balance between the 7th and 8th position. Maybe they'll make the playoffs. Maybe they won't. And even if they do make the playoffs, they're probably not going to go very far. They'll lose in the first round like they've done in last year in 2017. There's sort of a cap on it, and so that's what's frustrating. I think for Quakes fans right now.
So by the way, I just kind of do a brief reset here for anyone who has joined us recently. We did get Jackson Yule for just a moment before he was pulled in favor of, they were telling us we got Matias Almeyda. Turns out that wasn't happening. He wanted to continue to address the team, including Jackson. I don't think we've heard an update since then about who we're getting, but we were supposed to get Matias and Jackson. We'll get them to you as soon as we can.
We did just get an apology. Matias is still talking to the team according to public relations.
There you go.
They're like, hey, we're all waiting for him, so they hope he comes out as quickly as we do.
I'm going to go cut in an entirely different direction. Perhaps it'll surprise both of you and everyone in the chat with two weirdly optimistic things here. One is we haven't talked about the game very much because honestly, I think that sometimes we talk too much about the individual game and not enough about the big picture. I actually think the game was, in some ways, fairly watchable and had evidence of a team that was not completely incompetent. You know, it's not like we had in the Mika Stare era or the Mark Watson second year or whatever, where it just did not look like they belonged in the same field. The other thing, though, I want to point out, and so I'll push that to you guys in a second. The other thing I want to point out, though, is there are lower spending teams that are very good in MLS, but they tend to spend their money differently than San Jose does. So the New York Red Bulls, one of the lowest payrolls in the league every single year. FC Dallas, Philadelphia Union, Houston has been quite good recently on relatively modest budgets. You know, you can go through the list. There's actually quite a few teams that are lower spending on their playing staff. But largely, those have good academies. And they've done some good talent identification, and they've done some good drafting and kind of those other mechanisms there. And all of them, to my knowledge, have data scientists employed by the club. So I think there is actually a path for San Jose to get better, just with a different structure in place where they're spending their money in different ways without doubling or tripling their budget. You know, it's not like John Fisher has to all of a sudden dump a huge dump truck of money onto the club, because, by the way, that doesn't solve things either. They tried that in Chicago and in Cincinnati and in Miami, and it hasn't solved things. You have to be a very well-managed club in addition to the spending. I think that a slightly different management of this club actually could put it into a better position and make it an easier place for a coach to succeed. But anyway, if you guys want to follow up on that, please do. But I'm actually curious if you guys shared my impression that this was actually one of the more encouraging games in this kind of 7-game slide that we've had recently.
Yeah, the other watchable game was the other Galaxy game, to be quite honest. You know, they definitely came out with a lot of energy. I mean, let's give credit to the energy side. They came out early in the game with a lot of energy. The stadium was packed. You could see that it was affecting the players. They looked. I got this kind of just feeling coming from the field, like they were determined to show something different than what they showed against Orlando City, that 5-0 game where, you know, there was no tight man marking. There was a lot of looseness all over the place. They came out tonight. They started pushing people around. They got yellow cards early as a result of that. I'm not saying it was smart, but from an effort perspective, there was more effort. Alex is saying no. Alex, get your turn here in just a second to tell me why I'm wrong. But I saw it early. Now, the problem was over the course of the game, once they gave up the goal, it wasn't, you know, what it was, and it continued to slip and slip. And by the end of the game, there should have been a 4th goal right in front, a miss from the 6-yard box, basically. No one got back. No one seemed to care at that point. In fact, the only person on the pitch who seemed to care was Cowell, because he put one in the back of the net after that. But no one seemed to care at that point. And I think that's the concern, because that starts to be like, show that the players are kind of losing a belief either in themselves, in the system, in kind of the entire environment around them that's supposed to be supporting them. When you start off with that kind of energy and you end up in that kind of, you know, ending there, you know, where they look completely demoralized. I mean, yes, it got better after Cowell scored a goal. They got some life back, but that's what happens, right? They finally scored for the first time in 7 games, so they should get a little bit of life back. But, you know, too little, too late. You talked about game states, Colin. You know, the game states in this one just got worse and worse as the game went on.
Well, and I agree that it was concerning, Jamon, sort of the frustration and at the end of the game from the players. It looked like after Flo scored that own goal that the Quakes players put their heads down and they sort of stopped tracking back in defense. And the Galaxy really could have had 4 with a late chance there. But I don't really share the same optimism that you do about sort of the start of the game. I think that, you know, the fans brought a lot of energy. This was probably the most packed that I've seen PayPal Park in years, maybe since 2015 in the opener of the stadium. You know, there was lots of fans coming back. First game at 100% capacity since the beginning of the pandemic. From that perspective, it was it was awesome. And I think that the fans brought a lot of energy. The Ultras brought a lot of energy. But I never really saw that in the team. They just looked a little snake-bitten and a little shy, Jamon, especially after the Galaxy scored that first goal. You know, Almeyda talks about who he likes to be the protagonist, right? The Quakes weren't the protagonists in this game. And that's sort of been a trend. It feels like they're playing on the back foot. They're being reactive. They're not imposing their style. They're not pressing other teams high. They're sort of letting themselves get scored on and getting their heads down. And that's just not good enough. And I mean, you talk about, you know, some of the things that could make this team better. It's creating that width and what made them good last year, I think, and you know, previously under Almeyda, is when you have a guy in that number 10 position who can facilitate balls out wide and can move the ball and get the ball into dangerous areas in the final third. Because tonight, there's a couple minutes I just completely zoned out in that match while the Quakes were sort of cycling the ball around the back and did absolutely nothing with it. I sort of drooped my head down, picked it back up 2 minutes later. It was the exact same thing, passing it back and forth between Alanis and Flo and Paul Marie and Salinas. They had absolutely no penetration, nothing going forward. And it used to be, you know, when you had Magnus Eriksson in there, and even at moments, Andy Rios last season, they were sort of a second pivot player in there, somebody who could get the ball with their back to goal, play in those tight spaces, distribute the ball out wide to dangerous areas to Christian Espinosa, whoever's on the other wing. And that allows the Quakes to create chances in the final third. They just didn't have that today. Jackson Yule was not that player. And you know, that's one of the things that's holding them back, Colin.
Yeah, no, look, Jackson Yule is not a 10. It's not, he doesn't excel at the things you need to necessarily excel at the 10, but he also doesn't get the opportunity to do the things that he does excel at when he's at the number 10. And so I think it's kind of a double whammy taking away, you know, from his best usage. He might be the most talented, you know, central midfieldish player in the field, maybe, but that doesn't mean that that's the right role for him. And I think that you saw the contrast nicely where when Chofis was allowed into the spaces and positions that he actually is productive in, which only happened about, you know, 15 minutes left of the game, he actually looked pretty good because he does have this creative spark to him and this quality that occasionally can unlock things. But you really do kind of need to use him in the way that puts him in the best possible position. And so once we saw that, we saw a little bit more creativity. And so I think that Chofis Lopez could still end up being a good player for San Jose. I just don't think that he's spent a lot of time in the right sort of setups to get the most out of him. You know, if there's two strikers and Chofis kind of wide right, not so much. If you have Jackson Yule as the titular number 10 and then Chofis is kind of coming in, you know, into that same space, that's not getting the most out of him. But allowing him, say it's like a 4-3-3 where he's on the right wing and he actually can kind of drop into that space and create from the right flank, that works for me. You know, whatever it is, though, we saw more of those positions as things went on. I actually also wanted to briefly pick up on one other thing you were saying about the crowd. As supposedly a sellout crowd, it certainly looked fuller capacity than any game I've seen in San Jose in a long time. There is one weird incident where the Ultras walked out at the end, and I just wanted to clarify because I did hear from some Ultras sources, not able to independently confirm, of course, that LA Galaxy fans had actually gotten into that section and started fistfights, and that's when they all walked out. So I don't think that the Ultras walking out had anything to do with the poor performance. That is not at all their style. My impression is that that had something to do with crowd trouble, which is unfortunately something that does tend to happen in Cali Clasicos.
Matias is joining us now.
It's Almeyda. We'll start by taking a few questions in English, followed by a couple more in Spanish with no translation. Let's go ahead and get started with Jamon Moore.
Hi, Coach. Obviously a rough night. Finally did get the first open play goal in several games. But overall, it seemed that the attack was not asking enough questions of the Galaxy defense. How did you see the game tonight? It seems like you had some experiments in terms of players and positions. You know, where do you go from here?
Obviamente una noche dura. Por lo menos el equipo marcó el primer gol en varios partidos. Parecía que la ofensiva no le esforzó bastante a la defensa de Galaxy. ¿Cómo viste el partido? Se ve que probaste algunas cosas diferentes con jugadores y posiciones.
Sí, cuando se pierde trato de ver obviamente lo negativo, que ya lo vi,
When one loses, I obviously try to look at the negative, which I've already seen.
Pero también tengo que ver las cosas positivas.
And I also have to try to look at the positive things.
Obviamente los clásicos es más lindo ganarlos.
Obviously, it's nicer to win derbies.
Pero creo que hoy el equipo se vio diferente.
But I think that today the team looked different
a lo que fue el partido anterior.
compared to the last game.
Recuperó su identidad.
The team recovered their identity.
Y seguimos repitiendo los mismos errores que sacamos del medio.
And we keep making the same mistakes where we have to restart from the middle.
Pegamos 4 tiros en los palos.
We hit the post about 4 times.
Tuvimos nuestras posibilidades de hacer goles.
We had our goal scoring chances.
Y después, obviamente, un equipo que va ganando, que espera, como esperó Galaxy.
And then obviously a team that's winning, sitting deep like Galaxy did.
Es normal que tenga algún contragolpe de peligro como los tuvo.
It's normal for them to have dangerous counters like they did.
Pero bueno, el fútbol se trata de no cometer errores.
So football's about not making mistakes.
Y de concretar las acciones que tenés de gol.
And putting away the goal scoring chances that you had.
Thank you, Matias. Next question from Alex Morgan.
Unmuted.
Hi, Matias. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, Alex.
Last week you talked to us about how there are differences in some of the rosters in MLS and how you guys don't have as much depth as other teams. A couple of days ago, you added a new player to the roster, Nathan, and I'm curious how you envision him, improving this roster, and whether you think that this team still needs more additions in order to become competitive.
El otro día hablaste con la diferencia de planteles de San José comparado con algunos otros equipos. También ahora llegó un jugador nuevo, Nathan. ¿Cómo ves que podría ayudar a mejorar el equipo? Y si pensás que San José todavía tiene que contratar otros jugadores para que sea competitivo.
Bueno, creo que la llegada de Nathan nos refuerza sobre el plano defensivo.
I think Nathan's arrival reinforces us defensively.
Siempre tener competencia y recambio es bueno.
Having subs and backups is always good.
Yo he hablado mucho con Jesse y con el dueño en su momento.
I've spoken to Jesse and the owner quite a bit at certain times.
Y le he dado mis opiniones con respecto a lo que pretendemos de un San José en futuro.
And I've given them my opinions regarding what we're looking for at San Jose in the future.
Todos los entrenadores siempre quieren tener planteles numerosos, es normal.
All the coaches always want to have deep squads. That's normal.
Y bueno, nosotros tenemos un plantel con muchos jóvenes.
We have a roster with lots of youngsters.
Que seguramente nuestro proyecto y proceso.
We're surely our project and our process.
Hoy día está muy marcado que es diferente al de Galaxy, por ejemplo.
Today it's very clear, for example, it's really different than Galaxy's.
Nuestra idea siempre es competir.
Our idea is always to compete.
Pero sabemos que nuestros jóvenes les queda mucho tiempo por delante para aprender.
But we know that our youngsters still have a lot ahead of them to learn.
Entonces hay dos equipos que van a jugar cosas diferentes.
So there's two different teams that are going to play two different things.
Uno que está formado para pelear el título, que es Galaxy, por ejemplo hoy.
One team that's formed to fight for the title, which is Galaxy today, for example.
Y nuestro proceso es más lento, aunque querramos ganar también, ¿no?
And our process is slower, even though we still want to win.
Thank you, Matias. We're going to take one more question in English from Alicia Rodriguez.
Thank you. Matias, I wanted to ask, aside from the on-field performance, what did you make of the crowd tonight? It looked like a pretty packed house. Obviously, this is always a big fixture for the club. Having a full stadium for the California Clasico, what did you make of the environment and having a big night like this with all the fans in attendance?
¿Qué pensaste de ahora del regreso de toda la gente? Obviamente es una fecha muy importante para el club. ¿Y qué pensás del ambiente ahora que la cancha volvió a estar llena?
La verdad, da felicidad.
Honestly, wanted to congratulate them.
Jugar con tanto público nuestro siempre es algo lindo de sentir.
Playing with so many of our fans there is always something nice and a good feeling.
Para mí era muy especial el partido de hoy.
To me, today's game was really special.
Mi madre conoció la cancha.
My mother got to know our stadium.
Ella está visitándome aquí.
She's visiting me here.
Y mi deseo era que mi padre también estuviese en este partido.
And my wish was that my father would also be here.
Todos saben lo que ha sucedido con mi padre, pero me daba felicidad tantas cosas que le había contado a mi madre de lo que significaba este club para mí.
Everybody knows what happened with my father, but it made me happy. I told my mother what this club means to me.
Lo que significa para mí.
What it still means to me.
Y obviamente quería una victoria, ¿no?
And obviously I wanted a victory.
Pero bueno, también en la vida hay que saber aceptar cuando las cosas vienen medio torcidas.
But in life you have to accept when things get sort of twisted.
Y redoblaremos la apuesta para salir adelante.
And we will double down our bet to push forward.
Si algo me ha caracterizado a mí en mi vida deportiva y en mi vida personal,
if there's one thing that's characterized me in my personal and sporting life,
es no bajar los brazos nunca.
It's to never drop my arms.
Adelante, hasta, digamos, esto hay que intentarlo hasta que se dé vuelta, y si no hay gente arriba mío que tomará decisiones.
Keep going forward until there's no way around it, and then there's people above me that would have to make decisions.
Mientras tenga las posibilidades de trabajar,
as long as I have the chance to work,
tengo la energía y las ganas intactas.
I have the energy and desire intact.
Porque soy consciente de los pasos que vamos dando.
Because I'm aware of the steps that we're making.
Thank you, Matias. Switching over to the Spanish portion now, we will go to Carlos Ramirez.
Matías, un fuerte abrazo. Carlos Mauricio Ramírez de Telemundo, ¿cómo estás?
Un abrazo, Carlos, ¿cómo estás?
Profe, ¿sientes que el partido se define en ese fatídico minuto cuando Chris pega una en el palo, Chofis pega una en el palo, luego Osvaldo la entrega mal y viene el segundo gol de Javier? Ahí se rompió el partido, ¿no?
Era el mejor momento nuestro, que estábamos ahí, habíamos corregido cosas en el entretiempo y les había dicho, si viene un centro, ¿a quién hay que marcar? Hay un tipo enfrente que es goleador, nato, que ha jugado en muchas ligas, como el Chicharito, y él no va a perdonar. Y no perdonó. Y más si nosotros los ayudamos, como los errores que hemos tenido. Pero tengo que remarcar que el equipo volvió a tener identidad, más allá del resultado, que muchas veces ante una derrota y sobre todo un superclásico, hablar desde este lugar que estoy hablando yo resultaría hasta incómodo para algunos, pero yo no puedo dejar de ver la realidad. Entonces, hoy la diferencia la hace un tipo que tiene experiencia, un tipo que viene a esta liga para hacer la diferencia, y bueno, la hacen. Cuando viene esta clase de jugadores, ante los errores y todo, hacen diferencia. Esa es la realidad. Nosotros tuvimos nuestras posibilidades y no las concretamos. Si hubiésemos concretado las que tuvimos, seguramente el partido iba a ser de otra manera.
Thank you, Matias. One final question from Carlos Eustace. Let's go back to Carlos Ramirez if you happen to have one more question.
Sí, Matías. En el partido anterior, luego del partido contra Orlando, comentaste que el plan que armaste, tu equipo no lo siguió. Hoy el plan que armaste se siguió.
Sí, se siguió, pero después el fútbol tiene estas cosas. Nosotros el segundo clásico que nos hacemos un gol en contra. Entonces, esto no está practicado. Son, digamos, desgracias y errores que se cometen en el fútbol que saca del medio. Y ante eso no es que se busca un culpable, sí es una realidad. Entonces, seguir corrigiendo. Sabemos que hay momentos que la pelota se la tenemos que dar a un compañero nuestro, no a un rival. Y bueno, desde ahí surgen errores que cuestan caro ante rivales de jerarquía como Galaxy. Después el plan estaba bien armado. Nosotros nos reforzamos en el medio. No ingresaban por el medio, ingresaban por afuera a veces porque tienen velocidad, porque tienen buenos jugadores también. Pero estábamos bien parados. El segundo tiempo, digamos, ellos con un gol estaban metidos atrás para jugar de contragolpe, lo sabíamos que iba a suceder así, Y bueno, fuimos pacientes en ingresar por derecha, por izquierda, por el medio, por derecha, por izquierda, y creamos nuestras situaciones. Ahora hay que hacer goles. Esta es la realidad del fútbol y la simpleza que tiene, ¿no? Que es tan difícil para nosotros.
All right, thank you very much.
That was Matias Almeyda speaking at San Jose's post-match press conference. I believe we're going to have Jackson Yule returning momentarily, but we do have some live Spanish translation from our patron, Marcelo, who has been our man of the match these last couple games. The first question in Spanish was about, Chicharito. He says a guy like Chicharito won't forgive, especially with our mistakes. With those kind of players in this league, they don't forgive when mistakes are made. Second question was about the game plan. He said it wasn't followed against Orlando. Was it followed today? Matias said, that's soccer. Things happen. There's a reality. We have to keep working, not giving the ball away to big teams like the Galaxy. We were well structured, but with 2 goals up, we knew that they would wait and strike with a counter, and we were patient because we knew this. Both of those answers are paraphrased a lot, but I want to thank Marcelo again for helping us out with some Spanish translation there.
Fantastic. I mean, I think some of the things that really, I will just do a couple brief hits, both on the English questions and the Spanish section side of things that stood out to me and see what else stood out to you guys. One of the things that interested me is that he kind of made an explicit allusions to game states, which is the way that analytics people say we refer to them as game states. I don't think that real soccer people necessarily have referred to them as such, but basically he's saying once you get behind to a team that is set up the way that Galaxy is, of course they're going to be sitting deeper and be more compact, and of course they're going to be dangerous on the counter because they have a goal or 2 or in the end 3 of an advantage. That's kind of a natural progression. So it seems like he does kind of recognize the reality of it, even though it doesn't appear that he's really tactically adapting to it very much, other than just throwing on a bunch of strikers. Another thing that was interesting is that he said football is about not making mistakes, which is actually kind of the opposite of what he usually says when the team is doing well. When the team is doing well, what he says is, when my players make mistakes, I tell them to go try it again. Give it another shot. It's part of his kind of his proactive stance towards things. Is if you make a mistake, but it was a good decision, but it was a good thing to try, I want you to try it again and make it next time. This time, we're hearing the language of football's about not making mistakes. It's about converting when you have these opportunities. And it's a very different mindset. One of the things that players liked about Almeyda throughout time is that he gives them this confidence by saying, take another bite at the apple. It seems like maybe he's kind of wearing, it feels like the thread has been pulled a little bit too hard at this point. And the third thing that really caught my attention was, Alicia Rodriguez asked a very innocuous question about, having the fans back in the stadium. And he did kind of pivot towards a more of a discussion about his future and saying, basically, if the owner will have me, it's up to him. But if the owner will have me, I still have the energy to win. And taking that kind of unprompted opportunity to discuss his viability in his future definitely was attention grabbing for me. Well, Alex first. I'm interested in what caught your attention, both of you.
And what caught my attention, Colin, was something you hadn't mentioned, which is when he was talking about, the roster and his conversations with Jesse and the owner about adding players. And, if I'm a Quakes fan, I think those are demoralizing comments. The way he talked about how San Jose's project is fundamentally different from the Galaxies. The Galaxies are set up to win the title. The Quakes are not. But now we got to go to Jackson Yule.
Play a bit more advanced with the team. How do you feel it went? And do you think that you guys are going to continue to experiment until you find the right combination at this point?
Yeah, I think that's what the past couple of games have been about. Finding something that works. And I think a bit of what was successful in the past was our intensity in the midfield and recovering of the ball. And so I think, the three of us all being able to be on the pitch and in our right positions or close to our right positions is we thought would be beneficial for us today. And I think a lot in the first half. We were aggressive and didn't let them have many chances. And of course, I think in the going forward aspect of it, there's still positional cues to learn and to adapt to. But I think we're working and we're trying to find solutions of how to turn this around and how to get back to how we were defensively and offensively and creating chances and being aggressive defensively. And for that, Judson and Eric are fantastic, and the rest of the team does really well with it too. And it's just about recovering that form and not giving the team's opportunities to hurt us like they are right now. So we're working on a way to fix this, and I think we're doing the right things, and it's just about executing on the field.
Thank you, Jackson. Next question comes from Alex Morgan.
Unmuted.
Hi, Jackson. Thanks for joining us tonight. There were large periods of the game where you guys had possession and you were, holding the ball, and the Galaxy were sort of just sitting deep and soaking up the pressure. I'm curious, how you think you can start to break down that block, like what patterns you guys are looking for, when you're having, the possession, but maybe lacking some of that penetration, and, getting the ball in the final third, what you're looking for and what you need to improve to make that happen.
Yeah, I think, something to improve on, and this is on myself as well, is our final pass. I think, we get to the opposition end very well and under control, and then we kind of rush the last pass, and so it's about patience and opening up, especially when they do sit back in a low block and finding the right pass. I think we have a lot of speed, and in transition we're able to hurt teams, and that's what we've been doing well. So I think when teams start sitting back and not allowing us to use our speed as much, as when we kind of need to be patient and use our combinations as much as we can and do it better. And I think that's just quality in the offensive third, and end up finding the right pass to kind of set up the teammate. So I think it's something to improve, and definitely have been looking at that and trying to improve that aspect of our game.
Thank you, Jackson. Next question from Carlos Ramirez.
Hi, Carlos Ramirez, Telemundo and NBC Bay Area. What can you pull from previous experiences with this same group when you guys were in a funk, when you lost those games by 5 goals, and then just reemerged? What can you do what can you pull from that experience this time to, I guess, kind of righten the ship?
I think we're a better team right now than we were in those moments. I think we're a closer group. I think we all know what we have to do. And I think, within the group, I think we're going to pull ourselves out of this. We've had ups and downs, and this year we're hoping to be more consistent. And right now it hasn't been that way. But I have full faith in the coaching staff and the team. I think everyone knows their roles and their responsibilities. And, it's digging deep, and it's helping the person to the left, the person to the right, and fighting our way back, and trying to get a result, and try to build on that result. So I think we've definitely been in this situation a few more times than we've liked. I think we've learned how to get ourselves out, and that starts with belief in ourselves and within the locker room. And so I think we're confident that we're still a good team, and that we're able to play against anyone. And it's just about doing that on the field, and showing up every day in training, and then executing on game day.
Thank you, Jackson. One final question. Tonight was the first match you've played in front of a full crowd at PayPal Park in nearly 15 months. Can you talk about the fan support tonight and the atmosphere they provided in the stadium?
Yeah, it was awesome. Love having everyone back. It definitely felt different. Of course, it's a Cali Clasico, but just seeing everyone, when you're coming into the stadium, when you're warming up, when you're in the game, it's different. And we loved having everyone back, and we're excited to have them all the rest of the season, and hopefully can continue the support and their cheers throughout the rest of the year, and turn it around and make something of this year.
All right. Thank you very much, Jackson, and thanks for taking the time to speak with the group. Thank you all.
All right, there we eventually got it, Alex Morgan. There were some false starts there, and it's now 1:30 a.m. here on the East Coast. But eventually, we got her through our interviews, and that does mean, of course, that we're going to push it towards the wrap relatively soon. But I wanted to briefly go through Alex and Jamon. Anything stand out about Jackson's comments there to you? Caught your attention? For me, the one thing that caught my attention was just he was at least representing the players. Still seemed to be on board with the coaching staff.
Yeah, I don't feel that that Matias has lost the locker room. I don't think even last year when it got bad that had really happened. The thing that kind of stood out to me was more about the body language we were seeing from him tonight. Normally, the way that Jackson approaches a press conference is with a lot of confidence, and you can kind of hear in his voice that there's a lot of uncertainty right now, and as well there should be. I can't fault him for feeling that way. He's only human, and they've been going out there for the last 7 games and not seeing any good results for all the work that they're putting in and all the things that they're trying and the experimentation and him being asked and others being asked to play in different positions over the course of this, and trying out a new formation a couple of games ago and all that type of stuff, right? And just nothing's working. And so at this point, if you're a player, you have to ask yourself, okay, what experiment's coming next, and how's that going to go? Because the last ones didn't go so great. How many ideas are left here for us to try in order to turn this around? Yeah,
I almost felt bad for Jackson, because he's having to come out in front of us and sort of talk about all these tactical issues. When it's Matias's job, right? Matias is the one who should be answering the questions about the tactics, but he tends to divert in different directions when we ask him sort of specific tactical questions. And yeah, I feel bad for him, because the question I asked him was, how do you build out of the back with penetration? How do you get penetration in the final third? And it's pretty clear that the Quakes are out of ideas. He says it's the last pass, the key pass, but where is that supposed to come from? Where is that
actually
supposed to go?
One tiny thing that actually, now that you're reminding me of just now and saying that, is actually the first thing he said when he was answering your question was, or I guess it was more in reference to why he was being played at the 10, but something in that was about the intensity. And I actually think that might be the underrated factor here, is a lot of the goal generation that Matias's teams created in 2018 or 2019 and 2020, when it was working, were from high press turnovers. And so it's not necessarily sophisticated attacking movement. It's just from intensity, which is a valid way to approach it. And I think that actually might be part of the equation there. But yeah, it did not seem like there's an attacking movement plan.
I think you're right there, Colin, as well. That was something I think I noticed a couple of games ago, how San Jose basically aren't high pressing anymore. They used to be a team that pressed really high up the field, won a bunch of dangerous turnovers, but they're just not doing that. And that's I actually think you can see that in the data as well. Anay Patel had an article in Quakes Epicenter recently that showed, their passes per defensive action, I think, was way worse than it had been in past seasons. And that basically means how many passes they're allowing the other team, before they make a defensive action. And it's not as good as it was in previous seasons. They're sitting a lot deeper. They're winning the ball deeper up the field. And that's why they're not creating those dangerous turnovers and putting the other team on the back foot.
All right, driving this for a close here. Any other closing thoughts? My last closing thought I was going to give actually slightly on that note, which is the advanced metrics, or if we're just looking at XG, which is not a perfect metric by any stretch of the imagination, but a decent one. The Quakes offense has actually not been terrible this season. It's somewhere in the middle of the pack in XG. Its XG allowed, however, is dead last in the league. And therefore, I think that you can, look, there have been some offensive problems, but you can imagine a world in which the results get a bit better on that end of the ball. The XG on the defensive side is a crisis. if Nathan can help change that dynamic, and frequently there is a cascading effect of fixing one problem in defense can, buttress each and every defensive layer above that. Maybe there's a path back towards at least decent play later on in the year. Jamon, any last thoughts?
Yeah, let's talk real quick about Nathan, because we hadn't really addressed that. He was on the bench tonight, which, was a bit of a surprise, right? One of the things that we talked about with Matias, but we didn't get into on this is, hey, there's actually a player signing mid-season. We haven't seen this since Andy Rios and Carlos Fierro a couple years ago, right? So how quickly can he integrate in? How quickly can he start to understand the system? We understand that he has been playing games for FC Zurich. We actually have access to some of his more recent games, a clip of which we've put out on Quakes Epicenter for some of our patrons who have the video access as part of their benefits. And he's gonna have to learn the system. So it's not just hey, we signed this guy, let's throw him onto the field and see what he can do. It's going to take him a little bit, even to kind of get and understand some of the things that Flo understands. If he's basically intended to be Flo's, replacement, where he's going to be in the starting lineup and Flo will be his backup. Although Matias definitely, didn't tip his hand that's the direction he's going to go, and I think he does want to see what Nathan shows from a practice side. But he's going to have to get a detailed understanding of this system if we're going to see fixes to the defensive side, and he's going to be able to be a part of that. I don't know if we're going to see him for the next couple months is kind of a realistic timeline for me.
I think I can imagine in a couple weeks happening, but we should also say that Flo Youngworth is not the only center back in San Jose who's been having problems with his performance. So it might be a deeper problem than that. Alex, final thoughts?
Well, and just to add, I think it was Alanis who more or less lost Chicharito for both the Galaxy's goals. So, I think we could be seeing Tanner Beeson in the fold as well in that back line, or even as we saw against Austin a couple weeks ago, going with the back three, put Judson back there. I think, either of those combinations could improve this San Jose defense. And, it's 11 games in now, and they're sliding down the table. They're now in 10th place, but they've played a couple more games than the other teams around them. So once the other teams sort of catch up in terms of their fixtures, the Quakes could be looking at being one of the bottom couple teams in Major League Soccer. They've now got, only a couple points from their last 7 games, without a win in 7 games now. And they've only scored, I think, 3 goals in that time. 2 goals in that time, and only 1. Cade Cowell was the first from open play, I think, in a long time in that stretch. And so, yeah, the Quakes need to turn around. They need to turn around quickly. And I don't know if I see that happening in the next couple games. They have a pretty tough run of fixtures, I think. Next up, they play Minnesota, and Adrian Heath has had San Jose's number. He's been able to outcoach Almeyda. I think every time they've played, basically. Adrian Heath has Almeyda's number. So I'm not optimistic about the Quakes getting a result there. Then they play Sporting Kansas City, who are doing really well right now, and second in the table. They're going to be another tough team to beat on the road. Then they play Colorado. Sorry, they play Colorado before Sporting Kansas City. But Colorado are also a team who have in 4th place on a good run of form. So you look at the rest of the Western Conference, all the moves that they're making, and the sort of stacked table there, and the Quakes, you start to see them slipping out of contention, and you get to the point where their playoff position might start to be at risk relatively quickly, and that's the main concern, Colin, right now for the Quakes.
Indeed. So whether you're an optimistic Quakes fan or a pessimistic Quakes fan, you should be a supporter of ours on Patreon. We have 3 different levels here, a 2, a 5, and a 15 that have different levels of access. Jamon mentioned some of them earlier, that the 5 and the 15 have access to that game footage we have from Nathan playing for Zurich. The 2 gives you early access to our articles. We just went over 100 patrons, so thank you so much to the group here that's doing if you're an optimist, you get to watch Nathan and imagine how that might fix things. If you're a pessimist, the good news we have for you is this group we'll still be here for you. So subscribe to us on YouTube as well. We will still be doing games no matter how ugly they get, and helping you either process them or wallow in that negativity. So thank you all for signing on today. Great crowd to have. Great to have the crowd, of course, physically back in the stadium. We'll see you again on YouTube. Hopefully we'll see you again on the articles as well. Thanks and night.